So there we go.
Great. Well, thank you, Betsy, for being here. Betsy and I are, I would say, semi-colleagues. We met through a women's network of business leaders in the area. And she is an educational psychologist and keynote speaker. And she's going to share her 3 thoughts to thrive to give our mental and emotional wellness a boost as we recover and heal from, let's just face it, an extremely challenging year. She's a wife and mother of 2, a psychologist, an ambitious entrepreneur committed to supporting those who desire to live a life filled with purpose and passion. Through her keynote talks and online courses, retreats, and individual and group coaching, Betsy is here to inspire and empower us to rise up and live to our full potential. Betsy is a former school psychologist and created her own consulting firm that focuses on relationship building. And we have chatted at times about our connections with schools and helping children and families and people across all generations to really pay attention to their own thinking and make a difference in their own lives. So with that, I will pass it on to Betsy.
All right. Thank you so much. It's fun to be here with you all this morning. We're going to practice, see if the technology is going to work here again. And I'm going to share my screen. All right. You guys can see? Okay, wonderful. So let's talk about, we have been through this really interesting year with more of the path to unfold as we walk it here. So let's talk a little bit about how we can move ourselves from going through this kind of collective crisis that we've experienced, across the globe, and really move into the opportunity that's before us and how we're going to navigate this new normal. So I'll just share a little bit of a story here. You can kind of sit back and relax, and I'll share the story of Betsy. About 7 years ago, I was working part-time as a school psychologist in the schools. I had 2 young kids under the age of 5. I was married to my Prince Tyler. We were like ships passing in the night. And I was just that like working mom who was trying to do it all and balance it all and juggle it all and feel like I was doing none of it well. I was, in a sense, burning out. So much so to the point that I had these knots in my back. I would use what's called the back knobber 2 to work out my knots in my upper neck and, my upper back because I was so stressed out. Kind of like how most people are functioning today, unfortunately, right? Like this was kind of the normal, just that stress and that constant on the go. And on top of that, from that already kind of, I was in chronic pain, I wasn't all that healthy. We had a crisis in our family of origin, which was financial, and I won't get into it, all the gory details, but it definitely was confusing and chaotic, and there was lots of emotions flying, much like we're experiencing, what we've experienced in the past year. So this crisis in my family really caused me to pause, much like many of us have done in this last year, and engage in a bit of self-reflection and really get intentional and get more clear about how I wanted to live the second half of my life going forward. It was a little bit of the whole midlife crisis phase for me. And where it led me was to expand my career from being a psychologist and really understanding people and how they got to where they are from where they've been, to getting trained as a coach and really helping people in small groups and organizations understand where they are now and create a vision and an action plan for how they want to move forward. So what I found, and what so, typically happens when we're in crisis, is that sometimes when we think everything's falling apart, it's really falling into place. And as I started to study the transformational change process, this is what I discovered, is that there's a pattern, there's a structure to the change process, there's a structure to transition. And sometimes just giving people this information to, put some clarity, have people be able to understand that there is a pattern to what feels like a whole lot of chaos. That right there can help just kind of center and ground us in terms of our mental and emotional health. So here's how it works. We have the old status quo. So we can think about, January 2020, perhaps. Just kind of think about how we were functioning, what life was like then. Then we're kind of like going through the motions, right? Maybe we're a little bit like I was before my family's financial crisis, where it's like, I'm doing okay, but I'm still kind of struggling. Kind of just in that like survival mode, kind of like living paycheck to paycheck and, day to day, feeling overwhelmed. Then for all of us, there was for me, it was, the financial crisis in my family. For all of us in 2020, it was COVID hit, right? So there's that foreign element. And as this happens, when that foreign element comes into play, the first kind of phase is like, we resist that this is happening. Like, oh, this can't be real. We want to, you see the character kind of clinging on to the old status quo, clinging on to the way things were. A lot of like denials happening here, right? And even if like it wasn't necessarily all that healthy, even if we still were struggling and we still had problems, it's still like, oh my gosh, that was better than what I'm experiencing now, where things are cracked open and there's so much uncertainty and we don't know how to navigate. Okay, so people are at first going to just have this resistance and want to kind of cling on to the old ways. Then as time goes on, and you'll notice that time is kind of, the straight line across this. As time goes on, people start to be like, okay, they come out of denial. They're like, this is real. And we don't know how to navigate this. So perhaps, in your lives as a community, it's like, how are we going to hold our, weekly, how are we going to do this weekly as a congregation? How are we going to, are we doing this virtually? Are we doing this live? All the regulations, all of that, chaos that you've been navigating over the past year plus. So things get really confusing, emotions start flying, people are in that chaos mode. Then some folks will go into that really kind of hitting bottom low place of feeling desperate. I saw that a lot with, business owners as businesses were having to shut down. Just the educators I work with, just really struggling with the virtual schooling and what was going on with, kids at home and all of this. People really, that's when you really kind of go to a dark place of desperation, depression, lots of anxiety, hopelessness. I know we saw, an uptick in suicides this past year. So this is real. The struggle has been real. Some people are not going to, easily recover from that place. The healing process is going to take time. Some people, we need to like just recognize and be aware that everybody's going through this at a different phase. Like the way that people are going to process this change, everybody's going to do so differently. So some people really love change. They love to, have things shift and, have to be adaptable and quick on their feet and okay, let's see how we can do this differently. Some people will love the innovation that can come out of this and all that jazz. And some people are like really preferring that things stay the way they were. So just recognizing that everybody's going to be at a different place and a different time, and just starting to even have some words to understand, like, oh, this person is still, kind of in that resistance or feeling a lot of chaos or in this desperate phase, can be kind of helpful just to get some perspective on where people are at. Then eventually, over time, transforming ideas start to come into play, right? So, hey, we can do this virtually. Hey, I heard John say we can do this from the parking lot. I mean, we're going to have some new opportunities where light bulbs will go off. We're forced to get creative. We're forced to adapt. And so I've been seeing a whole lot of folks implement a whole lot of, interesting ideas over this past year plus on how they're still going to connect and make things happen. And then eventually those transforming ideas get integrated, into how we practice, into how we relate with each other. And over time, we develop a new status quo. And now often that new status quo, when we look back, we can actually become thankful for that foreign element coming into play, okay? Because it allowed for this opening up into these transforming ideas, right? Light bulbs going off, that allows us to practice differently, to connect differently, and to do so perhaps in ways that we couldn't even imagine before when we were in that old status quo. So it can be a real opportunity and a real gift as we arrive in that new status quo place. And there's a whole lot of things to sort through along the way. So that's what I've been helping people with, just that mental and emotional clarity and certainty, creating a new vision for where they want to go and making an action plan for how they're going to get there. So we're going to talk about those 3 thoughts to thrive today. But first, I'd love to open it up and have you participate. And I would love to hear some of the transforming ideas that have come to your group over this past year plus that you would like to continue to integrate moving forward. So you can just go off mute and you can share. I might have you do that rather than put it in the chat, because I'm not going to be great at navigating both. So if you want to just take yourself off mute and share, that would be great.
So I have one. My whole family, there's 22 of us, and we all live in different time zones. And we have had, just through COVID, we've decided every Sunday night to do a virtual happy hour and stay connected every week. And we could have done this before COVID, but we never did. And now we're doing it, even though we're going to get together this summer in person, we're still going to keep doing the Sunday COVID happy hour. Is that an example of like what you're talking about?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful. That's great. Who else?
We have a meditation group at Midvale, and we couldn't meet in person, so we went on Zoom. And now we're having our leader come. He was in Door County last week. He was able to lead it from there. Had we been in church, we wouldn't have been able to do this because our leader would not have been here. So we're very comfortable doing this by Zoom instead of being in the church.
That's fantastic. How many of you were on Zoom and interfacing on Zoom like this before COVID hit? One, couple, Heather, John. Okay, but for the rest of you, this is something new. Congratulations.
Yeah, my company was doing something called chats with Hangout, but this is it's akin to this, but it's different in some ways. And so now that chat has moved into a different arena, it's we have adopted the Zoom for our business purposes as well.
Yeah, nice.
With my family, us 5 siblings, we always get together on Thursday at 8:30 for about an hour. And I've got a sister out in San Francisco, and we're spread out, so that's why we do it at 8:30.
Yeah. My family, we discovered we could play Taboo together via Zoom. That was kind of fun. There's a lot of like, you could see up my mom's nose and all kinds of things with the camera, but we were able to pull in, the nieces and nephews that are in college down there in Madison. And yeah, it's a whole new landscape that across the generations, we could navigate together, which was kind of fun.
I also used Messenger, where you can do the chat time with the photo. My wife is in memory care, but every night I get to go feed her and eat with her, and she and then I connect with the kids with the messenger that way. And some of the I got one grandson who's 3 years old, and man, he can use that phone to put faces on me and do all kinds of stuff. It's amazing.
Yeah. It really is. Okay, well, thank you for sharing those examples. I'll just to give you a sense of, as I did this with educators, hang on, let me get, so I did this with educators last month. Some of the things they were noticing was I can actually run a virtual meeting. I like working from home. When we wear masks during cold and flu season, we don't get as sick in general. They just noticed that there weren't kids out as sick as much in general. The parents are showing up more consistently when the meetings are virtual. I think that's something in education that they're going to continue to offer going forward. That was a big deal. Realizing I'm much more capable and adaptable than I realized. Not having to commute is good for my work-life play well-being, and I feel closer to my family and friends. So these are some of the benefits that have come out, and that people are really kind of starting to think about. How do we integrate these things and keep them as a consistent part of our work and life practice going forward? All right, so I'm going to share my 3 thoughts to thrive that really can help us. And as you think about the transition that you're experiencing, do you refer to yourselves as a congregation? Is that the right term?
Work.
What's that? Yeah, okay. So as you think about your congregation navigating this change process, this is something that you can focus on, these 3 thoughts to thrive. So the first is to stand guard at the door of your mind. So what do I mean by that? Well, this is just kind of a funny little visual of, like, sometimes when we're in those stages of chaos or desperation, or things just really, feel like confusing and messy, our minds can feel like they're doing this. Now, if we're the ones who are supposed to be leading a congregation or leading our family, or just a community member that's functioning in the world, how effective are we going to be if this is where our mind is at? Okay, so we want stand guard at the door of your mind means if you're tuning into the news, or you're having conversations with people that are making you feel like that swirl or like that image, recognizing when it's time to, put some boundaries up and turn off the news, or, for folks that are on social media for hours and hours and hours, turning off the social media, not having so many of those conversations that raise your blood pressure, or, just make you feel even more anxious or depressed. Okay, so when we can kind of tune out and make sure we're intentional about the messages that we're feeding our mind, because our mind is like a garden. Like, the weeds are going to constantly grow in. We've got to be planting flowers in there, right? Too. Like, we've got to understand when our garden needs to be weeded, and make sure that we're constantly planting flowers, because we have a negativity bias in our brain that's going to, try to keep us focused on what's wrong. And so we really need to be mindful. And I'd love to hear that you're practicing meditation, because that is all like the planting flowers, planting flowers, planting flowers. All right, the second one is where focus goes, energy flows. So you're kind of putting up the mental and emotional boundaries around some of those negative inputs so that you can focus more clearly on where you want to go. And how I want to illustrate this is, if you are the driver of this car and you start to skid out, where should you be focused? Where should you be looking? Somebody answer this.
Oncoming traffic.
Yes, you're supposed to be looking at the open road. You're supposed to be looking at, where you want to go, making sure you have a clear, getaway. And yes, making sure that you're not going to hit other cars. And yet, where do we so often look is to that little pole, that skinny little pole, exactly where we don't want to go, right? When we get in states of confusion or chaos, it's really important to not get too fixated on that pole, like where we don't want to go. We want to recognize what's there, be aware, and mitigate the circumstances that might get us into trouble. And we also want to be able to stay focused on that open road and where we want to go and where we want to lead people. And the funny thing is that if you look at this whole picture, that little tiny pole takes up such, a small portion of it. The rest of it is really that open road, that open space. And yet we can become so fixated on what's wrong. So part of what's happening there is that we're staying stuck in our lower brain. So our lower brain is like that amygdala that really gets activated when we get into that fight, flight, freeze physiology. And we're in survival mode where we feel like we've got to, either fight to survive, we want to just escape and flee, or we just get paralyzed. So we saw a lot of people as COVID hit going into one of these modalities. And the trick here is that when you stay in that physiology for too long, your adrenaline, your cortisol, those stress hormones, they're only meant to, allow you to function for short bursts of time to overcome those threats. But we have had people staying in them like for a really long time. And that's where you just start to see like health and vitality erode and degrade. So we really want to understand, okay, even though there's these stresses, even though there's these pressures, how do I get out of this fight, flight, freeze physiology? Because it's not healthy for us to be under that amount of stress for long periods of time. So the way that we do that is we want to think about accessing our higher brain. So that's our prefrontal cortex. And this is what's going to allow us to think more creatively, think more critically, really kind of tap into that collective consciousness, and, communicate more effectively, all of these things. So I like the work of Martin Seligman. He is studying actually what happens with, he studied veterans who had experienced PTSD. And he's really talking now about how do we rewire ourselves and understand that it doesn't just have to be post-traumatic stress. We can actually experience post-traumatic growth. So people who have experienced these very traumatic situations, there's some folks who have found that they actually they have more higher well-being than before they experienced that trauma, because they've used their mind to focus on where they want to go, to focus on the positive outcomes, to really like create a vision for themselves. All of these, he's really discovering that there's all these ways that we can really use the power of our own mind and emotions to experience a whole lot of growth after trauma. So this is really how when I transformed after the crisis in my family life, I really moved into this personal growth place and use this thought to thrive number 3 to ask my brain better questions, because that's the key. Is you want to start asking your brain better questions because it will give you better answers. So that's getting out of that lower brain into that higher brain by asking a question like, how do I become more self-full, right? So how do I become even better after this traumatic situation? How do I become, how do I just start rewiring my brain to experience that post-traumatic growth? So what I'd like for us to do, maybe as a group here, is ask ourselves a better question. And this is, again, you can come off of mute. And let's see here. Oh, here we go. Oh yeah. So yes, this is how I went from selfless, right? I was like burning out, to more self-full. I realized I couldn't pour from an empty cup and I needed to take care of myself first. Okay. So we're going to ask your brain a better question. And I might do this instead of doing this as individuals. Let's do this as a group. Are there things that you would want to let go of as a congregation that are no longer serving you anymore, that you've discovered over this past year?
Well, I'm not sure this applies to the congregation, but as you were talking, I was thinking about things at a personal level. And, one of the dangers of the last year is sort of becoming obsessed with, bad news. So, the news of all the things that have been happening in the world and kind of, obsessing with that. And at some level, that doesn't ultimately serve me at some level. So I guess that's one thing at a personal level that we could let go of.
Betsy,
Yes.
this is Nancy Abraham. I'm always on Zoom by landline. So
Okay.
that's where I'm coming from. So your question of what the congregation is thinking about or wanting, or whatever the words are that you would insert there, we have not come together as a congregation. We have stayed together in very important ways, which I've been grateful for. But I think we need time to come back together in ways that we feel really safe and can interact face to face. Now, we had a service at Westmoreland Park last week, and there were over 100 people there. And it was a very joyful time, I think. And people stayed for the postlude. That almost never happens. People were, I think, so glad to be interacting with one another, in addition to, of course, having been able to do it through Zoom, and most people primarily on their other devices, and I, of course, on my old-fashioned one. So I'm always a little concerned when there's like a leap without thinking a little bit about what are you leaving behind and why are you leaving it behind? And just because there was a horrendous trauma, is that necessarily what needs to happen, leaving behind? I'm not saying it shouldn't, might not, or would not, but I'm a little more, of course, I'm 86 and a half years old, so that may explain part of where I'm coming from. But I would like you to clarify one thing that's unclear to me within the wonderful presentation you've given thus far. When you're talking about your family of origin, you're not talking about you, your husband, and your 2 children.
That's correct.
Okay, I wanted to be really clear. So that was an outside force that impacted your inside situation.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Much like, COVID was an external force.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
Yep.
Of course.
Yep.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I appreciate this piece about not wanting to take too big of a leap. I think there's wisdom there, and the incrementalism I think is important. Just one step at a time, because sometimes when we leap too far too fast, we can create an even bigger mess. So yeah, just really getting input from the community and figuring out how do you want to take the next step, and just recognizing like everybody's at different stages in that change process. And so if you're getting input from each other and making sure you're communicating about things, and then it's taking one step at a time, hopefully you're moving the whole group. There's enough like movement, but at a pace that works for everybody.
Depends on how you're moving, where you're moving, and why.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's great that coming back together, that was such a positive experience.
Oh, it was wonderful. And everybody was talking and talking afterwards, so I think that said something.
Sure.
Mhm.
And John, I appreciate the bad news. I too was sucked into, it was hard not to be sucked into kind of the 24/7 news cycle. There was an awareness piece of needing to understand what was happening and what the restrictions are and all this. And at the same time, it started to feel like I was falling into an abyss. And if you spend too much time there, it's like you look into the abyss too long and the abyss can start looking into you. So just recognizing when it's serving of your mental and emotional health, and when it's not, and especially if you're the one who others are looking for in terms of leadership or wisdom, how do you keep yourself centered and grounded?
Yeah. Betsy, this is Nels. One of the things that I think we as a congregation are trying to work our way through is, how are we defining success? And by that, I mean, in the past, we would be thinking in terms of, did you see the turnout? Or did you see how people reacted to such and such? And I think one of the things that we're moving toward, and maybe this is just me wearing rose-colored glasses, but I think we're moving more toward thinking in terms of defining success in terms of process as opposed to outcomes. And so we are trying different things, and where might that lead us to? Or we are thinking of that we have to do some renovations. And so what can we do to make those things work, as opposed to fixating on the prize and bringing it back into maybe smaller steps that we can work toward. So I kind of see us moving in that direction of redefining success and the steps that are taking to get there. And I don't know if that makes sense or not, but that's kind of what I'm seeing happening.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, immediately when you started talking, I was like, my mind went to process, right? Like getting excited about the process. I mean, excited about the outcome too. And you want to have a clear vision, you want to have a clear outcome. And then how do you celebrate the small wins along the way so that it's not just all about like success? It means, you know, how many people showed up this time or whatever. That's so important for the morale and the motivation.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, when I saw your slide about the person talking about post-traumatic stress versus post-traumatic growth, it really struck a chord in me to start thinking in terms of that being a positive growth as opposed to just returning to normal. So for those folks that are still tied to the landline, one of the visuals that was presented that I thought was really kind of clever was that falling into the hole and then stumbling and then trying to work your way out of that hole to create a new status quo. And then with their thinking of post-traumatic stress and reframing that into post-traumatic growth are kind of neat. So thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else want to, you guys have, you've leapt ahead of me. The next question I would ask is, what do I desire as part of my world going forward? So what do we want to move toward? Anybody else want to share what you'd like to move toward? Either personally or as a group?
I think I would add that it is, this whole process has proven that my grandpa would say there's many ways to skin a cat, right? Like you can have a virtual meeting now without any quality lacking or any professionalism lacking or any faith lacking. And 4 people could show up or 25 people could show up and it could still be a really powerful experience. So in moving forward, I hope we'll continue to bring, like the virtual service. There's no reason to not provide that still, in addition to other opportunities. Or we did a creative unit a few weeks ago and a creative check-in, and 3 people checked in, and it was just a fabulous experience for us that were there. So I hope we keep that mindset going forward, that is there another way we could do this? Can we, or maybe it's that creative thinking that I love, but to not limit ourselves, I guess, in moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a good chance that I wouldn't be here if, COVID hadn't happened and we weren't on Zoom, it's like we have these opportunities to interface and connect in all these ways that with so much more of the world than we have before. Okay, so I'll just go through a few more. I'll share a few more, and this might just get your mind thinking about other ways other things you might want to let go of, or even, as you look at family members or close friends, just getting clear. Clarity is kindness. So when we can get clear, and we've had such a year of kind of like a reset in some ways. So as we're coming out of this, as we're emerging out of this collective cocoon and really trying to figure out what the new normal looks like, as clear as we can be. And so I literally, this is an exercise I did for myself, and I was taking notes as you were all writing, but can you see my camera?
It's not real clear.
Okay, well, I just put these questions. I would just do a line of paper and said, what do I want to let go of? What do I want to, move toward? So really, really simple exercise that you can do for yourself, or you can encourage other people who are struggling to do. And for me, at the time, when I was in that desperation crisis mode, I said, I'm going to say no to this running in the hamster wheel feeling. I know that there's more purpose to my life than just this feeling of running in a hamster wheel. I said no to the patterns of generational alcoholism and addiction that had led to that financial crisis. I said no to being so much of a people pleaser. I said no to having too much stuff. I said no to eating that junky, sugary food. And I said no to being addicted to the 24-hour news cycle. So these were some big things I got clear about and said no to. And then that allowed me to ask that question, okay, because that stuff took a whole lot of energy. I was pouring a whole lot of resources into all that stuff, a whole lot of time, emotion, money, whatever. And then that created space for me to say yes to being in more harmony with myself, eating, more nutritious foods, taking more breaks, going on more retreats, having more solitude, more self-care, and having more play and presence with my kids at the time. Remember, my kids at this time were under 5. So I actually nicknamed one of them Presence and one of them Play in my mind to just have that constant reminder that that's what I wanted to say yes to more often. And then that power symbol was my personal power. I said yes to more of my personal power. Okay, so just recognizing this is a really simple exercise that as we think about how do I want to navigate my new normal, or how do we personally, or how do I want to navigate it within my marriage, or how do I want to navigate with my kids or my grandkids or as a congregation, right? The really simple, powerful exercise. All right, and then the other piece is when we get clear on action steps we want to take, we need to remember that knowledge is not necessarily power. It's the implementation of knowledge that's power. So we can talk about this stuff. It's when we actually schedule it, right? If we get it on our calendar, we're much more likely to take action. So for me at the time, I decided I'm going to start with, this is where I baby stepped it. 1 yoga class a week is kind of where I started in order to get myself out of chronic pain and just, my mental and emotional wellness. I started with 60 minutes of yoga because it would hit the mind, body, spirit. And then I built in, the next thing I built in was 60 minutes of meditation a week. I took a class and I just kept building it step by step from there until, I had no idea that, I thought I was just going to live before that crisis in my family hit. I just thought I was going to keep living that lifestyle I was living, even though I was in chronic pain and I was, feeling burned out. It's only because, I can stand in that new status quo place now, and I can see it's only because that happened. It kind of cracked me open and forced me to reevaluate and reassess my life, that I'm here with you now, that I'm doing what I'm doing now, which is I've created a couple programs. I've got a Balance Not Burnout program for folks. I took my most powerful coaching exercises and put them into a program. And then I've got a Tired Mamas retreat coming up here in August to support the tired mamas coming off of this last year. And then I've got a relationship course that my husband Tyler and I did together. So again, I really just like to get out there and share my personal story, because it really was the crisis that created all of this opportunity and everything that has unfolded from there. And, if one person can do this, it means we can replicate it personally. It means we can replicate it in teams, as organizations. The message is it's possible. That post-traumatic growth really is possible. So thank you for having me today. I'm open to any questions. I want to peek at our time. Oh, we're over time, or we're getting close to time.
Okay. I guess we should leave it open for a few moments for people if they have thoughts or questions. So please feel free. But I do kind of have an odd question for you.
Sure.
With regard to where things seem to be going, how do we maintain that space between work and home, because home is and other places. I do kind of want to make that distinction in my own mind, but in this virtual world, they seem to be melding in some ways. And so how do you, getting back to, I think you had a slide about the door.
Mhm.
You want to talk a little more about that?
Yeah, so like how to like put boundaries around work.
Yeah, because, we're looking to try to keep some kind of balance, I suspect.
Yeah.
And it just seems that in this new environment, balance is a little harder to come by because the doors aren't as obvious.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Um, it really, that kind of comes from that internal resource of giving yourself permission to turn off. You like, and just getting in the habit of saying no. Like, what do I want to say no to? I want to say no to, the feeling like I need to be on 24/7 in terms of work. Or oftentimes I found that it's not even like leadership or people's bosses that are expecting them to be on work wise as much as they're putting that on themselves, that they're putting those demands on themselves. So I think honestly giving yourself permission to just stop, turn off, close your computer, shut off your phone. Um, I have seen some companies are going to where they're using technology to help set the boundaries, and you can't even access your work accounts after a certain amount of time. So for some companies and folks, the external environment is providing those boundaries. If yours is not, that has to come from that internal fortitude of practicing healthier boundary setting yourself, just deciding on, and scheduling that in, like put that in your calendar. Like this is turn off time. Because if we put it in our calendars, if we schedule it, we're way more likely to do it, to comply.
Thank you.
Hmm. And I also, I mean, are there any brain surgeons in the group? because something that helps me, you just kind of like, you got to work on your internal dialogue. This is all an inside game here, unless you got some external help, like those companies that are forcing you to not be able to access your work stuff. But I often, like, something that helps me is like, I'm not a brain surgeon, I'm not an ER doc. Like, nobody's going to die if I close this computer screen, and when I come back to it, I'm good. When I come back to it, when I take some time for restoration, rest and digest is actually when, like, that's what really helps us maximize our performance. It's not when we like go, 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 go. It's when we allow ourselves to rest and digest and then come back and we're refreshed and restored. So just getting into that mindset of like, my maximum performance is not when I burn myself into the ground. It is when I give myself permission to close the computer screen, to turn off my phone and come back to it restored, that I'm going to be most productive and, perform. It's a mindset shift.
This is John. I think one of the things that people have valued is during this time is they spent more time trying to go for walks outside and for a while you couldn't buy a bike because so many people were buying bikes and even though we want to reclaim a lot of things, I think there's maybe some of those activities or outlets that people maybe would like to continue to make a priority of too. And I'm kind of wondering if you have any thoughts about that.
Yes, absolutely. And pets too. I mean, this was a really good year for dogs.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, if How many people were out in nature more, would you say, this year? Yeah, so that's another one that maybe not such a transformational idea, but maybe something that we practice more regularly, more consistently. It may be one of those things that we integrated more. And so if you know that that's been healthy for you, if that's contributed to more mental and emotional well-being, then making sure that you consistently keep that built into your lifestyle. Absolutely, that's been a great positive impact from this year. And so even, if it helps to, again, like schedule that into your calendar. I'm going to work for this long, and then I'm going to, be in nature for this long. Just because that is such a restorative piece that helps with the balance. And the pets.
Okay.
I think we lost Heather, huh?
Yeah, I believe so. Yes. Okay. Well, again, Betsy, I do want to thank you for your presentation and your time. I want to let everyone else know, and of course, Betsy, if you should choose to in the future want to join us as a participant and or as a presenter, you're certainly welcome to. But we will be rescheduling. We'll be starting up our fall schedule beginning in September. But at this point, we don't have any spring sessions planned for the summer. But if things do evolve and other ideas come forward, please let us know, and we'll try to integrate them into a forum for you. So thank you, Betsy. Do appreciate all that you've done, and the invitation to learn more about you as well.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Betsy.
You're welcome.
Yeah, let me add my thanks, and we'll have to get the soccer team result from Heather and later on, I guess. So, but no, I was really, and since you've capped off our seminar series or our talk here, you could say we've saved the best for last. So that's
Oh, thank
No.
you so much.
Nels, there will be summer programs, just not on Sunday. Pastor Ken is putting together a series for us.
Yeah, there's a summer adult Bible study kind of a thing that he's been assembled and has put together several of speakers for that. So, but as a forum committee doing their the forums in this more traditional setting is going to regroup and get ready for the fall. That's a good point. Thank you, David.
Have a wonderful summer, everybody.
Thank you.
okay. Yeah, take care. Yeah, bye-bye.
I know.
Nels and John, would you stay on for a minute?
Sure, let me stop the recording.
Thank you very much. I appreciated it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Betsy.